how exciting for us in the stop motion season to have Henry Selick here, who's like a legend in the form. And James and the Giant Peach, and Night Before Christmas, and Wendell and Wild. The list goes on. So it's a thrill to have you here, and it's really exciting to perhaps have this conversation with you about how this project ended up at Laika, because it's a project I know had been really sort of cheerleading for a little while, and then incredible kind of timing and sort of serendipity, if you like, because Laika were just properly starting. And you needed that kind of technological advance as well to really make this work, which was kind of happening around this time. And obviously you had a very talented kind of global crew who kind of really rose to the challenge. So I wonder if we just talk a little bit about that, kind of the way that project came to be.
Yeah, it was, the story just wasn't the normal animated family film story. So people in Hollywood didn't get it, couldn't support it. They were too afraid of it. And Laika was a little braver. At the time, I called them the bravest animation studio in the world, and they were. For them, they were, especially Travis Knight, who now runs the studio. Back then, he was the top animator. They kind of understood what it was about, and they also supported the play of dark and light. They didn't try to make it too safe. And technologically, it was the first stop motion shot originally in 3D. That technology was something I was aware of. This man, Lenny Lipton, the late Lenny, he had come up with this new type of 3D and shown it to me before we made the film, and I felt that'll be perfect. That will be our Wizard of Oz effect, from like going from a black and white world into color back in the 1930s. We'll go from a kind of a flattened real world of Coraline's normal life into a fantastic dimensional world in this duplicate life she discovers on the other side of a little door.
And I wonder if you just talk a little bit about the kind of like the graphic style of the film, in terms of, because you were kind of very influenced by a designer whose name I'm not going to try and pronounce, but I guess you will be able to do it better than I have, who's had worked in sort of 50s and 60s illustrations in the US.
There's an amazing Japanese artist, illustrator, Tadahiro Uesugi, who for whatever reason, he is enamored of 1950s, 60s American-style advertising illustration. They used to do lots of illustration for advertising, and he sort of soaked that up. I came across his work, ended up working with him, hiring him as the main illustrator for the film, and I so much loved what he did that really battled hard to try to capture that very exactly. Like there's a building, those who haven't seen the film, it's a house that was divided up into different apartments. We call it the Pink Palace. That kind of became the test. Can we capture Tadahiro's line perfectly? Because it's very unique. Also, you'll find when Coraline is trying to walk away, she's in the other world. She thinks she can walk away from it, and she discovers that it's a very small world. As the world kind of disintegrates, that was another moment I really wanted to capture what Tadahiro did. If when you see the film, I think these moments the house design, her walking away, trying to escape as the world disintegrates, they'll be memorable. And he was heavily involved in shaping the look of the film.
And I know, as much as there are some people who've never seen the film before, there are some people who have seen the film probably thousands of times, either as children or as parents.
I hope not thousands.
Well,
scores would make me perfectly happy.
And Teri, I wonder whether we could just talk about your role as the mother and the other mother, because I think there's a tendency sometimes in the industry to think about sort of voice acting as being somehow kind of slightly sort of different. But actually, in my mind, it kind of almost feels like it's probably more difficult, because when you're acting in front of a camera, you're inhabiting a role, you've got your body language and you're moving and you're making all those decisions, but you have to do all of that through your voice. And I wonder, had you much experience of voice acting before you did this role?
No, we were talking about this yesterday. It's hard to remember things in chronological order exactly, but I'm pretty sure this was my first animated film, and you sort of validated that, So I remember showing up at the recording studio kind of thinking sort of what you were alluding to, that I was going to do some sort of nasally squirrel rabbit voice or something, And
all animation has nasally squirrel and rabbits.
Because all animation has the nasally squirrel. And anyway, and Henry's really first and foremost guiding direction for me was to be real. And so it was from that point of view, and thank you for that question, because it is an interesting and not necessarily easier job to tell a story through your voice, tell a character's wants and needs and emotions through just your voice. And I mean, we rely so much on our eyes and our mouth and our hands. I was doing an interview earlier, and the interviewer had the microphone blocking her mouth, and I almost couldn't hear her because I couldn't see her lips moving. So it's an interesting thing. But I approached the two moms. I mean, there's three, but the two.
And that's interesting as well. The fact you are doing almost like three roles.
I was doing it like
two sides to the other mother, aren't there?
Yeah, the first mother I approached, who I think was the most difficult for me because she was the most imperfect, and I think when you're an actor and you approach someone who has flaws and maybe isn't always the greatest person. Sometimes that's uncomfortable to sit in that because we all kind of want to be perfect and want to be liked. And the real mother, you'll find her at a point, like all moms, who loves her family and loves her daughter, but is exhausted and worried and impatient. And that's a difficult place to approach your parenting from. And so she was very grounded and heavy and short, I guess. And then it made the other mother easier because she was just like a bubble of air. There's like no response, no reaction, really. Like everything is just in control, and till it's not. And then that's the I think that third thing is like, when you realize that you're not going to get what you need to survive, that's kind of what that comes out of. So that's sort of how I approached it, really, as these three different people that had needs and wants and desires and were going after them.
And how did it work when you were recording the voice? Did you have Henry with you when you were recording?
Oh, yeah.
And is he kind of directing you in the way that you would direct in a live action film, so to speak?
I mean, I think we both speak to this, but I think often in my animated work, you find, which I love, the opportunity to do a line over and over and over and over, and where they might find in editing that they take one word from one take and another part of the sentence from a different take, and it allows them to really be able to manipulate and join the different performances to execute the vision that they want, which I'm not privy to. I'm at home eating snacks. But I enjoy the subtlety of emotion that you can put into a line, and you just change it a little here, a little there. Do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, we do end up recording many, many takes. We want to have the ability to adjust it tonally. The film, it's in the U.S. it got a PG, parental guidance rating. It was very important we get that. Not a general, not just any kid can walk in. It's supposed to be parents guiding their children, but we wanted it to be frightening right up to that edge, to be most impactful. And so having the different flavors in the takes allows us to dial it in just right for any given moment. I wanted to add something about casting Teri. I often like to put the voices together like you've got a small musical ensemble. We already had Dakota Fanning, and I had in mind that Teri had an interesting voice. She was in a very successful television series at the time, had been in movies and many other things. And so I just, I cut existing footage of her with her voice against Dakota and knew that was good. But I also, something I haven't said was, people didn't know you in a more monstrous way. They didn't, that I thought it'd be a great surprise when the other mother kind of reveals more of who she actually is. That a voice they might be familiar with, actually, it turns out to have this whole other side to
Oh,
them.
wow. That,
Yeah.
that was
and
fun.
and it worked really
Yeah, it
well.
you'll see.
And presumably you're going back at certain points and recording during the process. And I wonder whether, is Henry sort of sharing with you like sort of the visuals of what you look like and the world you're in, or at the very start is it literally like a kind of blank piece of paper? I mean, how much of the project did you actually know in terms of what you saw as it developed?
I think again, my memory is potentially a little bit flawed here, but I feel like it starts off with maybe you're seeing a sketch or something, but it's not created all in form completely yet, and then there's it happens, the voice recording happens over 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's a long time of going back and forth. I will say maybe halfway into it is my recollection. My daughter, actually, who's here with me, who was 9 at the time, got to go up to Portland to the studio. And that is when you first understand, oh, wow, that's what this is. Like you're walking into these huge stages with huge cameras where a little Coraline doll is, moving like this much and the camera's coming in, we got to meet the artists that were knitting the little sweaters that were like this big that would go on the little dolls. I mean, and you're just mind blown at the artistry of it. And so that was really, I guess, the first time I really understood what we were creating or what they were creating that I was a part of.
And you mentioned obviously your daughter is here, Emerson.
Yeah.
She is also, so when you look in the credits, you'll see there is one Emerson Hatcher listed. There's also a couple
Which
of
is her name is Emerson Tenney, which is so funny because that's it, that's her dad's last name. But yes, go on.
That is, and then there's a couple of Selicks in there as well. So can you tell us about that?
Well, from my point of view, and when I think back on this,
Because the audience can listen out for those voices now as well, can't they?
What?
I said the audience can now listen out for the voices.
Oh,
when
they
they're watching the
can.
film.
Yeah. So what I loved about this was, well, first of all, I asked Henry if it would be okay if there was some little part that Emerson could do. And I think in hindsight, I'm sort of amazed that I had the gall to do that.
No, you're not.
No, I am. No, I mean, I'm glad that I did, but now
You're a good mom.
It makes my palms sweat to think that I had the gall to do that. But to his credit, which I love because work ethic and delayed gratification and all of those that kind of part of parenting was always really important to me. Henry actually made her audition for about an hour with him where he had her play different little parts, and ultimately decided that she could be one of the Fireflies or the Fireflies. And so you'll see there's a scene. Huh? Dragonfly. I'm sorry, not Firefly. Dragonfly. You'll see that they're flying around, and she's saying Coraline, 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 and that's my daughter, who is now actually credits her whole experience with going to Portland and seeing it all. She's actually an animated script writer herself. That's what she ended up doing, and yep.
And there's a pair of Selicks in there as well.
Using your own kids, it's cheap.
Yeah.
And
using other people's kids is cheaper.
it was there was just a couple of parts. My older son, Harry, both sons fell in love with Portland and they live there as adults now. But this was a long time ago, and Harry played in the other world where everything's supposed to be better than her real life. There's a photo of her, Coraline's friends from back home, and my son Harry did the voice of one of those friends. So he's got just a couple of lines. The other son, George, who now goes by Ren, he does the voice of one of the ghost children, and it's a little bit bigger part. He had a very interesting voice at that time in his life.
Great voice, actually.
Yeah, and you'd think he would have just been happy. Oh, I get to do a part in a movie, but it took pleading and begging, money and candy, because he didn't understand that you don't just say it once. I have to have a few takes. he'd go take a nap, and I'd wake him up. You have to go again. No, Dad. But they both did a good job, and are happy to have been a part of it.
Yeah.
I wonder if we just talk a little bit about the technology. I touched on the fact, obviously, technology in stop motion was really changing at this time, and actually, Laika was a big part of that. And one of the really remarkable things was the use of sort of 3D printer to kind of create the mouths on the figures, which I think you were able to this stage. I think they couldn't do it in colour till Paranorman, but you were doing it in black and white with Coraline. Can you just tell us a little bit about how that evolved and how you used that?
Yeah, myself and this gentleman, Martin Meunier, had been working together on another project, and we rented an office, and the owner of the company had bought one of the world's first 3D printers. It was color, very crude, and we both came up with this idea that wouldn't it be great? We won't have to hand sculpt all the faces for the in-between expressions, the tradition in stop motion. You can do replacements where you're actually sculpting all the different expressions, then changing either part of the face or the entire head, or mechanical faces, which is something I also love, where there's, sort of a rubber skin over a little face that you can manipulate, open the jaw and so forth. So we brought that idea, and this guy, Brian McLean, who's a brilliant guy who's in charge of that department, he came on, and we took that idea and ran with it. The 3D printers, I'm sure we were the first film probably to use 3D printers at all, and we went beyond just the faces. We could print very small, delicate props and sort of help with the scale of the whole film. And, from the role of just giving us more flexibility in the expressiveness of characters, we were able to use it in many other ways. And early on, we decided that splitting the face in half, having a seam, having separate upper faces and lower, would give us the ability to not have to do thousands and thousands of faces, but we could combine uppers and lowers to get kind of different combinations. And originally, I really wanted to keep the seam line showing. I felt like, well, people will see it, they'll understand, oh, that's how they did this, but in 5 minutes they forget it. But we decided ultimately to paint that out.
And the other thing I guess that you can do, I know the stop motion is where it's at, but you're in a world now where digital can be used to enhance or elevate certain moments. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about that sort of decision-making process, about when you decide to move into a sort of digital space.
Yeah, I was pushing pretty hard to use digital only where necessary, only where it really served to plus something, not as a crutch. There are a few scenes that could arguably have been done in CG much more easily. There's a jumping mouse circus where these, jumping mice are animating in formations, playing instruments. And, that could easily be done in CG, but I felt it would be mediocre if it was CG. But if we did full replacement poses of the mice that you use over and over again, it would be magic. We did the same thing in the downstairs theater where there's a theater as big as this room or bigger, filled with Scotty dogs as the audience.
It's one of my favorite scenes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I know. Right?
And it's, again...
The mice is, as you said,
Yeah.
magical.
So where I could, I argued to keep it handmade in stop motion, but the fact is we were shooting digitally, we were capturing. We could play back right away to know if we'd got the shot. Whereas just a few years earlier, you're shooting on film and you don't know. You might be able to capture with a video assist some of it, but the digital did come in enormously, and shooting in 3D, it was a huge help as far as compositing, painting out rigs. We previously, if a character was going to jump high or fly, we'd have to attach them to, it was called spider wire. Wires so thin that the camera didn't pick them up. But it was like impossible, you're moving them along and then they're swinging in the air, you're trying to steady it down and so forth. So we did embrace digital where it made the most sense and used it. And ultimately, it does make sense to build the worlds out, set extensions, skies and so forth, the digital can really help. But I'm always going to like try to go practical, because what I love the most about stop motion is the making of the films. The process is what I love. And it's like live action in miniature, but instead of the whole army focus on one shot, it's divided into all these groups, and you're doing multiple shots and multiple stages that all take a very long time. But I love that. I don't want to hand all that off to the digital world.
And when they're watching the film and they see that scene with all those dogs in there, how many of those dogs are real? I mean, are some of them kind of mirrored or digital, or are
No, none. They're all real.
all of them?
But they all can't.
It's a lot.
They all can't do much. There's like certain ones that could just move their heads and nod, and then there's others with mouths and positions that are featured more. And you got your hero dogs, and then you've got your backups.
And Teri, when you kind of left the project, so to speak, you said you went and and saw the set and stuff. Were you able to kind of take anything away with you? Did you have any kind of keepsakes or anything?
Do you know, I believe after the movie premiered, so it wasn't like right then, they sent me, I have a few things that I now feel, now that it's 15 years later, I'm like, these are coveted. Like I kind of can't, I'm wondering if someone's sorry that they gave them to me, but I've got them and I'm not giving them back. But I have a little other mother, and I have a dog. I have one dog with the little wings, and I have a Coraline. What else do I have on the shelf? Do you remember?
Oh, you got a ghost child as well.
Do I have a ghost child? And I definitely have like a little key with a button, the button key, and it's all sort of on my shelf together. So it's really.
So it's obviously something you're really proud of.
Oh yeah. There's not a lot of things on that shelf. I have a mug from, I was on an episode of a show called Night Court. It was like maybe my second job in the late 80s or something. And I was like a guest star on this sitcom. And when you were guest star, they gave you a mug. It's a black coffee mug, and it says, "I got my mug on Night Court." That made it on the shelf.
Do you ever get people coming up and asking you to recite any lines from Coraline?
Oh, yes. Well, I don't know, spoiler alert. I mean, this is not, yeah, I guess I can say this.
I'm
with
encouraging
spoiler
you
alert.
to do it. Yeah.
Well, there's one that people ask me to do on their answering machine all the time, which is, "You can stay forever if you want to." So I get that one a lot.
And Henry, obviously, we're going to watch the film now, and it's sort of 15 years on. When you look back and reflect on it, and you think about it, how do you feel when you look back on it? It must be something you're also very proud of.
It was a very challenging experience. I mainly look back with gratitude that I had such an incredible crew to work with, such a range of talent, but I mean high talent. People like Teri and all the artists, the animators, and the studio that backed the vision. So looking back, it's gratitude for that time, but now 15 years later, a different type of gratitude, something that you worked so hard on has lasted, that there's continued interest in the film. I'm grateful that Laika remastered it in 3D as it was meant to be seen originally. So no bad feelings whatsoever.
Well, I'm really excited to say it's now time to watch the film. A huge, huge thank you to Teri and Henry. Thank you so much. Thank you.